Hey, it's Drybear. Yesterday I put out a video explaining exactly what Lucky Hit is, but also extending that to why Lucky Hit exists in the first place and why it's important for you. But on that video, I got an amazing comment from a viewer that I was going to respond to directly, but I actually figured that it would be better to answer it in video format so we are all on the same page. And that question pertains to bonus Lucky Hit on your gear and through other stats. If Lucky Hit is this chance to trigger a proc, what is bonus Lucky Hit and how does that apply to my build? So that's what I'm going to talk about today in the video, is what that stat actually means and why it's different from Lucky Hit and how you can use it to calculate your build efficacy. But first, you should come hang out with me on my live stream. I'm live every single day on twitch.tv/Drybear. If you don't come hang out with me and the community, then the next time you enter into a public elevator with other people in it, you'll have a sudden urge to fart, but you'll be faced with a choice to either try and hold it in or release it and hope nobody notices. Let's begin by giving a quick recap of Lucky Hit in general for anyone who missed my previous video, and then for more information, you can look for that one on my channel. But a history of what this is, right, is let's look at the history of proc chances in RPGs like Diablo. You would be given a % chance to trigger an effect, like freezing an enemy, like causing vulnerable, like slowing an enemy, like stunning an enemy, like giving any kind of bonus from a proc chance. The problem with a flat system like just pure proc chance is that it's not fair to the method of delivery, right? So if you have something like Bone Splinters, which hits very often, or even something like Ice Shards from Sorceress, which hits very often, versus something like Hammer of the Ancients or Pulverize from Druid, which hits not very often, if they each have equal chances to proc, it's unfair to the ones that are slower because they will not have as many opportunities to proc the effect. Now, in my past as a developer and a game designer, I've had to explain this concept many times, and I like using actual weaponry like first-person shooter weaponry because I think it's a lot easier to understand for people that are first trying to grasp this concept. So take, for example, you're making a first-person shooter and you have a pistol which shoots one bullet at a time at a rate of 1 bullet per second. So every second, the refire rate is 1 second. You can fire a single bullet. Then you have a shotgun which can fire 8 times. So when it fires once, it fires 8 bullets total, so 8 pellets every 1 second. So every 1 second, the pistol hits 1 time, the shotgun hits 8 times. Now, if you take both of those and you give them both a 50% chance to light the target on fire, that means that the shotgun is going to, on average, trigger significantly more fire than the pistol, right? The pistol will trigger fire once every 2 seconds, and the shotgun itself will trigger 50% for every single pellet times 8, which means it's 4 times a second. So it's 8 times more procs than the pistol. So the existence of Lucky Hit is a way for Blizzard to be able to control the vessel that carries the damage source to the target and deals that proc chance, right? So when you look at an ability, and on that ability it has its own Lucky Hit chance, this is what's happening. Remember, the shotgun needs to have a lower chance to proc because it hits more often and more frequently. The pistol needs a higher chance to proc because it doesn't hit quite as often as the shotgun would. And so that gives them their own little way to nerf and buff individual abilities that deliver Lucky Hits to make it fair for all of the abilities in the game, so that no matter what, when you're running some kind of status ailment, elemental proc, or some kind of proc in general, you can make it fair for the vessel that delivers it. And the hope is that they're able to balance that out over time. I'm willing to bet a million coconuts that within the first week, we're going to see a bunch of abilities have their Lucky Hit chance changed and altered based on how much they're seeing them proc and do different effects. So that is your first chance to trigger a Lucky Hit. That's what I explained in the other video, but let's go into how it goes through the next part of the process and explain how bonus Lucky Hit makes its way into this equation. To help understand what happens next, let's look at what a hit can be, right? So you have a source of damage, whatever ability you want to talk about, whatever you want to think of it as, that is your source of damage. It has triggered, say it did 50 damage, boom, there you go, you got it all figured out. Now there is a chance that that source of damage can turn into something else. And we'll use the ones that people already very well understand to extend it to Lucky Hit. so it makes it a lot clearer. The first one that's very easy to understand is critical strikes. This exists in games everywhere. Most people that have been playing games understand crits. So when you deal a source of damage, there is a chance, based on your critical strike chance, that that ability becomes a crit. So it goes into the critical bucket, and once it's into the critical bucket, the damage gets scaled by your crit damage. So your crit damage will increase the damage of that source of damage by your crit damage, and your chance to go into the crit bucket is your critical strike chance. Same thing goes for overpower. So if you have a source of damage, there's a chance that it turns into an overpower hit, and that gets scaled by your overpower damage, right? So again, once the source of damage makes it into the bucket that marks it as that kind of hit, a critical hit, an overpower hit, then something else happens to that hit once it goes into that bucket. And guess what? Lucky hits are exactly the same. So there's a chance, based on your lucky hit chance, that a hit will become a lucky hit. Now, we know, based on this bucket system, that something happens to it once it becomes a lucky hit. And by the way, just to make it clear, in case it's unclear here, none of these are mutually exclusive. You can have an overpower that critically strikes. You can have a crit that becomes a lucky hit, whatever. What we care about is that this source of damage, whatever it is, has landed in the lucky hit bucket. It has become a lucky hit, and that lucky hit chance that you see on your ability is the chance that it lands in this bucket. Once it lands in this bucket, then it then has access to all of the procs that your character currently has, right? This can be freeze, this can be stun, this can be slow, this can be poison, this can be all kinds of proc effects. Each one of those proc effects has its own chance to proc, right? But the reason it's two-layered like this is because it makes it easier to balance and to stabilize the game. So instead of making it so every single source of damage has a proc chance to trigger these effects, then it becomes this really difficult game of trying to balance all of the proc chances directly, right? So is 5% chance to freeze the target fair? Well, it is maybe if you use it for Spark for Sorceress, but is that fair for Pulverize for Druid? Not really, that's too low. So by expanding the system and making it more complicated, it gives them more knobs and levers to turn so they can balance it and make it so that chance to proc is more viable for more builds and more fun for people that want to play in different ways, and you don't get to that situation in ARPGs where there's one build that's the best and you can't go anything else because everything else is insufficient. So you're gonna roll 2 sets of dice as you go through this. And this part is why it's confusing for a lot of people, is because there are multiple steps in the process that happen on the back end that aren't perfectly clear, and it's also a proper noun they've given to this system that hasn't really existed before, so people don't understand. So the first dice that you roll when you deal any source of damage, you roll this dice to see what kind of hit is this. Is this a normal hit? Is it gonna critically strike? Is it an overpower hit? Or is it a lucky hit? Once you go into the lucky hit bucket, that is your first dice roll, that's the lucky hit chance you see on the ability. Then once you're in that bucket of all your possible procs, you roll a second set of dice to see if any of your procs go off. So, lucky hit into proc. The bonus lucky hit percent that you see on your gear and on your items scales the final value. So once you have an actual proc chance based on this process, that value gets scaled as a percentage up from where it was. Let's take an actual example. So since we're talking about freezing on Sorceress, we look at Frostbolt, which hits moderately slow. It's not crazy fast. It's not anything like Spark, which is going to be like 9% chance to hit, or much slower with Arc Lash, or a little bit faster with Firebolt. This one has a 40% chance to lucky hit, and that is a value that they will scale independently and buff and nerf, depending on how they think Frostbolt should be triggering effects. So you have a 40% chance to hit lucky hit with Frostbolt. Then we come down here and we have a passive, if we're running a Frost build. This passive, Snap Freeze, says that when you have a lucky hit, the Frost skill that applied it has a 9% chance to instantly freeze the target. So following the same system, you initially have a 40% chance to become a lucky hit. Once it becomes a lucky hit, you then have a 9% chance for that lucky hit to trigger that freeze proc. Anytime you're dealing with percentages and you want to use scalars, you can convert them to decimals. So we're going to go to 0.4, which is 40% of 1. And we're going to multiply that by 0.09, which is 9% of 1. This gives you your total proc chance, right? From start to finish, becoming a lucky hit. And then once it becomes a lucky hit, then rolling the dice to see if you get a proc. Which means at the end of the day, you then have a 3.6% chance to freeze the target every single time you hit them with your Frostbolt. 3.6% of the time, that is your proc chance for freezing at base. Now, when we look at the bonus lucky hit chance in the stat sheet in-game, what it says is increases the chance of triggering lucky hits with your skills. This is not the chance of rolling the dice and getting a freeze. This doesn't increase globally your chance of proccing. This increases your chance of getting into the lucky hit bucket to then roll the dice again to get a proc. So if we go back to this process here, your lucky hit chance bonus is not affecting your chance to freeze. It's not the second dice. It is affecting the first dice. Your chance of getting into the bucket to trigger a freeze. And because it's a percentage value, percentages treat everyone equally. It's not going to make Hammer of the Ancients better than the other. That's what percentages are. It's a contextual scalar based on how big the value actually is. So in this case, where we're saying Frostbolt has a 40% chance to cause a lucky hit and a 9% chance once it becomes a lucky hit to trigger a freeze, if you had 20% bonus lucky hit from your gear, it would increase the 40% value on the left side of this equation. Your chance to enter into the proc bucket, not your chance to proc. And on last testing, we'll see if this stays with live, but you can actually see this reflected on the tooltip. When you have increased chance to lucky hit chance, it'll show up on the tooltip. So a 20% increased lucky hit chance would then turn this value into 48% lucky hit into the 9% chance to proc, which individually does actually increase your chance to proc, just not as directly as you think it would. So getting 20% bonus lucky hit chance takes your original 3.6% chance to proc and turns it into, make sure this is on screen so I can see it, 4.32% chance to proc. So boom, all of a sudden you have this nice scalar here where 20% increased lucky hit chance does increase your chance to proc. But here's the kicker, and why it's being described this way by many people out there right now is that very basic math is that if you have a number and you multiply it by a number and you multiply it by a number, it's going to affect it regardless no matter where you put it in the equation. So even though it is affecting your first number here, if you do 40%, so 0.4 times 0.09, which is your 9% chance to freeze, times 1.2, which is your scalar for 20% more lucky hit chance on this first number, it gets applied to all of it regardless. So this first number here equals 4.32% chance to proc. And if you did the equation first, which you put these in parentheses, 3.6 times 1.2, that also equals 4.32% chance to proc. So I know it's a lot of numbers for people that aren't math people, but that's how the lucky hit bonus works. It's not an additive. And before I forget, let's shout out the viewer that made this comment that triggered this video, right? So the question was, does anyone know if bonus lucky hit is additive or multiplicative in relation to the base lucky hit percent for the skill? I.e., if I get 100% bonus lucky hit, does that make it from 20% plus 100 into 120% proc? Or is it 20 times double, an extra 100% into 40? And so the answer would be the second. It is actually a percentage scalar on your chance to get into the lucky hit bucket, which maths out to changing your proc chance by the same amount, because getting into the bucket gives you a chance to roll again to get that proc, right? So that's how the lucky hit bonus works. So even though you're not getting a crazy amount of proc for 20%, it is increasing your chance to proc. And if all of this is nonsense to you, you can just think of lucky bonus hit percent as a scalar to make your procs proc more often. And that is fine enough as a simplification to think about how that system works. And you can treat it that way if you really want to. But for the people that are interested, I wanted to give more detail as to how that system functions. If you found value in the video, leave a like down below, comment, it helps me out tremendously. It helps the video get seen by more people, which helps me individually. And come hang out with me on my live stream. If you have further questions, I'd be happy to answer them there. If you enjoyed yourself today, leave a like down below. You can support me and my work on Patreon and view Patreon exclusive content, link in the description. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.